I figured it wasn't that hard to figure out the resources thing. I thought it was gonna be a lot harder. It was actually really easy. Hopefully I have that opened there. So I'm gonna wait to see if it's streaming. I'm gonna talk about the. I've been studying. I'm not really sure yet if I'm gonna do this, but I was thinking about doing small, like not even game, just create the stuff that I think I'm gonna use from the editor first to see, because I have to become more familiar with how things are usually done. And I think it's a lot easier to do that from the editor, because obviously if I'm gonna try to automate everything, then uh, I have to know, because it's like a confusing thing, because you have to, I'm studying an application to build another application, and that's been kind of confusing me a lot. So, but hopefully, I think over time it's just gonna become a lot more clear. So right now I'm thinking about what is the best way to structure things so I can clarify slowly, gradually how things work. Now, one of the things that is confusing is I'm not really sure. Ideally, I think I would like to be able to do something that allows me to compile the project right away, bypassing the editor. So, like when I compile the engine, it compiles the package automatically. It creates the packages, like creates everything that it needs, or and then runs or compiles the project right away. So, but the issue is that in order for me to do that, I'm gonna have to use some editor functions. So either I can extract the functions for the export workflow there, and then put on my own thing, on my own folder, or I can just use the editor. But then if I use the editor, I'm forced to compile with the editor tag. So I'm not really, this is kind of the part that is confusing, because I'm not really exactly sure. I think I would like to build something that allows me to build several different projects, not just one. But then if that's the case, then like it's kind of confusing. How should I do it? So I think for now, what I'm going to focus on is just assuming that I'm going to use the project manager and the editor, or just the project manager to create the project and select the project. And I'm probably going to start by creating a module here. And on the module, I'm going to assume that the editor selected a project. So that's what I'm going to assume that I have to compile for the editor, because obviously it has to run the project manager, and I'm not going to have the data. And then I'm going to work with the classes from the project, which is going to assume the. So the way that it works is that it's just very simple. It gets from the project settings. So there's a function on the main, which is setup, I think. I don't remember now. What I think maybe it's this one. So it's the first setup function that it calls. It has a condition there to, yeah, this condition here. So this is the first condition where it checks to see if you have if the engine has the package data. So if you compile, you can compile passing the flag target equals template. If you do that, it's going to compile the engine. If you pass target equals editor, it's going to compile for the project manager, which is going to load the project. It loads the project if you pass the /e and then the path to the project as you initialize the executable. And if you don't pass that, then it opens the project manager. And it's very confusing, because then it depends on the build system, and the build system is a pain in the ass to figure out. But it's basically on this X construct here that it has it builds based on this stuff here. So one option that I was thinking about is obviously do another tag, another flag, just like the editor is, but for my project, and then I accept, for example, create or select, and then equals the path to the project. I could do it like that. I think it's just easier to compile for the editor first, but it's very confusing. Because I'm trying to achieve something that it allows me to use the editor when I want to, and it allows me to build straight from code. And the main thing that I was thinking about as I was figuring this stuff out now, watching other people create games, is how do they do it with if you have a 3D game and you want to put a GUI or a user interface that is in 2D, how does that work? And then I've seen there that they have some options to do billboarding, but the main way I downloaded some examples, and it looks from the other examples that the main way to do it is by putting a control node. But this is the thing that is kind of confusing because I was thinking about like the original idea I had was to figure out how they do their own the editor GUI elements, and then use those functions to create my GUI, and then just use the other stuff to create the actual scene. But if I do that, then I think I'm not going to be able to. I am going to be able to build everything from code, I think, but then I might not be able to use the editor unless I change the functionality from the editor. So I think one of the main questions that is going on in my mind now is to understand. I have to understand the functionality of the nodes and what each node allows me to do, and whether or not this functionality is similar. There is a node that is similar or the same as the ones that they use to create the GUI. Because as I've seen plenty of times, the way that they do it is just by creating a bunch of nodes, a bunch of classes inside of the constructor of the editor node, and then they append as as children. So I could use those classes, but yeah, that's what this stuff that I'm trying to figure out now. But basically, this is the main function that looks for whether or not uh, either you. So it looks for a couple of options there it has on the comments. Not really sure where it is. Here. Yeah, so the other setup is gonna call that setup. Yeah, so it calls here, and then this one has the description here. So it's basically gonna try a bunch of methods to figure out if there is a package file or if the executable has the package file embedded on it. And this is the part that was kind of I wasn't sure if it was gonna be hard to figure out, but like I don't know why I thought that it would be difficult because it's just pretty much basically the same thing they do when they create when you put the embed package so that you put the data that is relevant to the game in the executable. All that they're doing is just opening the executable and then writing stuff to the memory. Because all the data file is just a place in memory that is gonna contain some other stuff, which is the metadata, that is gonna allow the operational system to figure out how to read that data. That's pretty much all that a file is. So yeah, they open the file and then they just manually write stuff to the file. And then here is just the reverse. So they look for a couple of options here. And then here they are gonna figure out, they're gonna open the file and figure out if the file has the information. I think it's after this main pack here. So they got the executable path, and this is the function, I think. This is the main function. Just see if the current executable running, which is the engine, has the information for the project on the executable itself. Then after they check for this, they're going to check to see if there is a separate file. There's the package file that contains the information. And then all that is happening is that they are getting this information and they're updating the project settings, I think, class with the whatever is the relevant information for the project. This part I'm not really 100% sure. I know that the project Godot file is the one that has the specification, so I think they changed the state of the project settings class based on the project Godot file. But the package is related to the resources on the game. And basically based on what I've seen, there's usually two main types of file. One is this .tscn, which stands for scene, and the other is the GD, which stands for script. So I think that's mainly how it works. And this file here, all that this file is just it's very similar to the project.godot. It's just a language I think that they created that has the specifications of what resources you have on the scene. And then the GD is going to be the functionality of each thing. Yeah, so now I'm not gonna spend too much time here. Let me see if I can. I think at this point here they're gonna start changing some information. This I remember this looking into this function here. So this is the main function that is gonna read the project Godot file, and then I think that this is the function that parses the file and is gonna update the project settings. But I think that this probably doesn't do anything directly with the resources. So maybe it's another function here. It could be these functions. So it's the same function, it just changes the file. So I think this function is the one that's. Oh, I want to see if I can understand. This packet data is the thing that they use, sure. That I thought that I said it was confusing last time to figure out how, because they use this thing to write information to the executable, I think, and to create the other file. So maybe it's before. No, it doesn't make sense, should be. So I think this is probably the two main functions that change stuff. They're just changing on the resource, and this is probably registering on the class DB thing. Script server. If I remember from the documentation, the GD script is a module. It's actually not part of the engine itself, which made me think that the other macros that I thought were related to GD script are not related to. This is one of the main things that I'm trying to figure out now. After I study so the main thing that I'm gonna do is just study the events there. It's not that confusing. I went over it one more time, and it's less confusing than I thought it was. And I thought originally I think I thought it was confusing because I was thinking about a bunch of other stuff, but it seems like it's not that confusing. So yeah, but understanding the inputs is probably gonna be the annoying part. I'm gonna have to go over the scene tree, but I'm gonna do that later. So after I go over there, the source code for the events, I wrote down a bunch of, so I went over this functionality here, and then I wrote down the tooltip, which is the thing that shows up there, and the labels, and I'm gonna search for this on the source code, and then put breakpoints and just manually study the code first. Maybe this is related to GD script. GD class. This is the main macro that I was thinking about. I thought that it is from GD script. Based on the documentation now, I'm not really sure if it is or it isn't. I put there on the list to study GD script, but only later. Yes, here. So just storing there. So I guess it stores everything on this packet data variable or class, which is a global class, probably. So all that is doing is just figuring out based on the path if the file exists, and if it does, it creates this thing here. So probably on the export there, on the functions that were kind of confusing to me, what it's doing is just uh, going over the scenes and the GD script files you have, and then putting them on either on the executable or creating another file, which is the package file, to put the files. And then here, what it's doing is just extracting each file and then it's saving on the sources, just parts of this packet data. And the thing that is weird is just it opens only one, if it exists. Yeah, so it is probably on the constructor. You probably register the class on the constructor, but I'm not really sure. I'm gonna move on to the other stuff. I'll focus on this another time. So the main thing that I'm gonna follow the list that I have there. Probably the best thing to do after. So I think I'm gonna follow the steps here, and then after I finish this, except for the 7, which is gonna be to create the module. I think first what I have to do is just create something simple from. I need to create the kind of like similar to the stuff that I'm thinking about creating, because the main thing that I was confused by now is this UI thing, because the other projects I couldn't run because they are from previous versions of Godot and they have some problems, so it doesn't allow me to see how the project looks like. So I think I have to try to basically, as far as there's one of the like there's two confusing parts. One is the how to do the UI, 2D UI on the 3D thing. The the other thing is the camera that is kind of confusing because like when I was thinking about when I was creating from the beginning, it's a lot easier to think about because I was thinking from the perspective of the camera, and it's something similar to the front end that I want to achieve in the beginning, which is just basically this thing here that I'm trying to do. So I'm thinking about like how I'm gonna do this, because the way that it shows up here is like in a road, and then when you put the camera 3D nodes, so adds camera. If I remember correctly, everything is the other create scenes on 3D or 2D is everything inherits from the node 3D. So the node 3D is the base one, and then you can create. I think you can create any node you want as the roots. Then depends on what you're gonna do, but usually people I think creates either node 3D or node 3D depending on if you're gonna do 2D or 3D. And then that's the roots of the scene, and then you add it's the same thing I was doing before. You're just creating a tree structure that is gonna contain everything that this scene shows. And then when you wanna create another scene, you just go, I think here somewhere, or new scene, and then creates another file, I think. Yeah. So here you would create here, and then when you save, it's gonna put the thing here. Which you can do on save scene or Control S. So the thing that is kind of confusing is to imagine. So for example, I have the camera here. I think I don't know how you move this. Yeah, here. But I guess it's pretty much the same thing. Because obviously the calculation. So yeah, I think the thing to figure out is I'm gonna have to. I was trying to avoid spending time studying GD script, but I think I'm gonna have to figure out. Because the main thing is GD script. So I think the way that it works is all the stuff you put here is and all the stuff for the scene is just the what assets show on the scene, and then the functionality of the scene is on the GD script, and that's how you're gonna encode events on each thing. And because here I have to do the physics simulation, but obviously I want to avoid using GD script, so I have to, and this is kind of the thing that is confusing because I'm not really sure exactly where you would be best to put what I'm trying to do. I'm not really sure if it works as a module or something like that. Because I want to merge the two. On the other way, this is on the other this stuff here. That's how I was thinking about it. Is that you create a graph structure, and then from the graph structure, you loop over the nodes, for example, and then for each node, you create a resource. And I wanted to be able to do this programmatically. And then I was thinking about if I have live data or something like that. Like, but I guess I thought maybe if I do it straight from the editor, then you can't really do that. But then you can do it if you put GDScript stuff probably. So that's kind of the thing that is confusing. So how do I programmatically? Maybe I should search for this, because usually I think that's this is. But I've seen some videos where people create stuff that is not games. So I'm sure that it works for other things. I just have to clarify how exactly does that work. So let's say, for example, I want to like loop over some data structure and then create and remove. Oh, this is the reason why I wrote down there. So I wrote down delete nodes here as well. But this is the thing that I'm not really sure, like, if it makes sense. Because the way that I'm thinking about it, which goes on the thing that's of creating, using an application to create a game. That's why it's kind of confusing. Because the way that I was thinking about it in the other one, let's say you have a scene, and then based on some data, you want to add and remove nodes, uh, depending on what kind of data is coming. So would I create something here that allows me to do that on the application? Or do I encode that here? I'm not really sure. Hey man, what's up? Because I think that the way you build usually is like assuming that the scene is always going to be the same. But I guess you can do this on the GDScript probably. So you can, this is the question actually, is whether or not, like, is it possible to dynamically create and destroy meshes from GDScript? I think I'm gonna ask ChatGPT. Yeah, but I have to, I don't wanna, I'm gonna ask this later. I will ask here. So I'm gonna continue to go over this stuff here. So this is the main thing that gets called. I'm gonna look for the editor nodes. I'm following the list here, what I'm doing today. So the first thing that I'm trying to do, I'm just gonna go over the source code of the emit signal and the connect. Probably just the connect function. So the way that it works on Godot is that when you want a class, or I think it's mainly a class, anything that inherits from the object class, when you want to add event functionality, what you do is just call the connect function, and then you pass a string and you pass a macro, and the macro generates some struct, and that struct, this is the part that I have to figure out, but it's basically a subscription on the connect, and then every time that you emit signal with that string is gonna call whatever you subscribed with. So I'm trying to clarify how does that work. And after that, I wrote down these breakpoints here, or these labels, based on information from the editor here. And then I'm going to look for them on the source code, and then put some breakpoints based on them to try to understand or clarify how the functionality on the editor is related to the source code. Because I'm trying to automate the process if I want to. So ideally, I would be able to do both, automate and do it from the editor. But that's the tricky part, because it's very confusing to think about how to do this. So I think this is a good example. So it's basically like this. So on the emit signal, there's some string formatting that they usually do, but usually whenever you call emit signal and pass the string, is gonna call whatever you put here. And that's kind of the part that is confusing, because this is a macro and this is gonna subscribe. This is gonna return a function pointer, I think. So here is accept. So it's gonna it's gonna return this. It's gonna initialize this callable with a function or something confusing like that. So this is a struct that is part of the object class. And here I assume that this bind is similar to the bind on JavaScript, where you're gonna maintain the context. So this stuff here is gonna be called on the on this context here, I think. Whenever you call bind. Yeah, so it's probably passing as an argument here, but I'm not really sure. Because this is another question. Is if the function receives arguments, then what happens? So this calls this passing the thing. Just this. So this I think I remember, if I remember, is the context. So it's in what context you want the function to be called, and then the other one is a function, I think. So it's passing this. I is probably instance, m is probably method. Create custom callable function pointer. Custom callable function. So it is an instance, pointer to an instance. And then this is the methods. This is the part that I think I said that was confusing. So, but I think here is just using templates to create a function pointer that's gonna call the methods with parameters. I think that's what's happening here. But it is kind of confusing. So it is using this t probably because, so whatever you pass as the first argument is gonna call the method from that. So it's using that as it's using the template to access that, the class or whatever you pass there, I think. So R is probably stands for return, and P for parameter. And that's what makes sense. So it's defining a type of this. So it creates this class. Messes with memnew otherwise. So memnew is the way that they initialize memory. It's basically it's similar to using malloc, I think. But it puts the memory on the memory pool that they have instead. So it's defining this type and then creating a place in memory with the initializing CC and P with P instance and P methods. That's very confusing. And then they are using that to initialize the callable. That's the thing. So I guess I have to look into this. This is a constructor. I remember this being. I'm not really sure if this is going on the correct place here. Because I remember this being on the objects class. I guess I can look from here. Oh no, it's connection. So connection has callable. I was confusing the two. So probably it is that one. So I have to look into the constructor. And the bind is going to be from this. So it's initializing everything, then calling bind from this. So let me think about this. It's probably this one, usually. So pointer to the object. It's object because object is going to be the base class. I think every time you call this. There is a condition there if it isn't. I think the standard it is for not for the method to not be a string name, I think. So yeah. Maybe it was somewhere else or something else. So it just stores the object and the methods on the callable class. It stores the object ID. So object ID is probably the thing that is used on the class DB to get the class, I think. So let me see. I think I remember seeing this as well. Look into this function. So it's creating an array of variants and then adding a new variant. And then it passes here. Damn. Yeah, it is actually confusing to understand. I guess it's just changing the. It's kind of confusing, but it's just passing it. It's changing the callable that it's gonna send here. So first initializes this callable, the first callable with this stuff. Then it does the other, yeah, and it's gonna pass the instance from the callable and just translating or passing the arguments, which is probably so it's creating variants from the arguments it passes here. And I think variants is this the class that they use to parse a bunch of different files. So it's basically the same thing, just a vector of variants. So let me think of this. It's very confusing. I don't like this very much. Maybe it has to be this way, but so I'm gonna go back from the beginning. But just intuitively, I think it makes sense that it's just binding arguments, the function arguments. Sure. So imagine that when you don't pass anything and the function requires arguments, you're gonna have to pass them when you call emit signal. I think that's what would make most sense. But when you want the function to have default arguments, then you do this bind stuff, and then what's doing here is just creating this other class that is based on the arguments and is gonna use the context of the first callable as the context for the arguments, and then initialize a other callable with this class here. But it doesn't feel like it feels very overcomplicated. So it just seems that to me that there must be a way to make this a lot simpler. But I think I'm not gonna bother with this stuff because I'm just trying to understand because I'm gonna use this stuff on the high level, so it's gonna make it easier when I'm doing this. Like to understand what ways do I have to, what ways I can use, I have to use to subscribe events and stuff like that. I guess I can look into the function to see. So it is we're gonna receive an argument. So I think it is this stuff that I was talking about. This function receives an argument and they wanna pass the arguments. This argument whenever there's the event. I think that's what's happening here. So this is the argument to the function. You're just binding based on the context, I think. But not very good, I think. Let me look into the. I have to look into the constructor of the callable again. This accepts callable class because it comes from here. Yeah, this one is the macro that creates. So callable accepts another is callable custom. And so I have to clarify the other class. Do you think is this one? So this is a function pointer, and this is the function pointer. Then the object ID and the instance. So it sets data, sets memory for that this data. And then updates the data with the information that it passes there. So it's gonna save this. So I assume that's, yeah. I don't know why they did things like this. It seems very confusing, to be honest. But I assume what's gonna happen is that from the other stuff outside, from the callable, that's the callable stores the thing here. I guess they did it like this because maybe, yeah, because if you wanna, actually, maybe not. I was gonna say if you wanna have a bunch of different events for the same thing, then it makes sense. But I think still like kind of weird. So the obvious question that I have is why not just use one class to store everything? Is so they're probably gonna access this from the main callable there that has the, because on the callable constructor is gonna store the method and the instance, I think. Yeah, let me go that there again. So this returns the callable, which accepts the other one. Oh, it should be this constructor actually, not the other one. So I guess the other ones are in case you want to pass a callable directly. So maybe it's possible to initialize the thing directly with a callable, or you can use the macro. And if you use the macro, it's gonna create this other callable custom. So this is the one that is being used there on the other macro. And the other class probably inherits from this callable custom, I think. This class here. Yeah. So just storing the callable inside of this, callable custom inside of this, and then it's probably gonna access through this. So access through custom, and then the callable custom has the methods and the thing on the data. But it's very weird, to be honest. And now I think I roughly understand what's going on. So the main thing that changes is just the main question I have is why. So But that's gonna be difficult to figure out because I need to know examples. Or maybe like, yeah, when should you use one or the other? That's the problem. The main thing that comes to my mind is just the arguments, but I'm not really sure if that would make a lot of sense. What is the benefits of using this callable custom? I guess I can look into this other. I can look into a bunch of them to see how usually. But usually, I think the way that they do it is by passing the macro. So I think that's probably the best way to do it. Yeah, I think it makes more sense now to look into the emit signal function. I think that in order to understand, I have to go over the inputs because emit signal probably not gonna have a bunch of things. So I don't understand very well the nuances, but the only way I'm gonna be able to know is how exactly how it works when when the event's fired off. But in order to understand that, I think I have to go over the inputs, which is probably gonna be on the scene traversal. So it's kind of annoying. Yeah, I'm gonna look into the so yeah, the main thing to remember is that so when it does creates in the way that it was showing there, it creates this other callable custom, and then it's gonna store the arguments on these binds of the callable custom, and this callable custom is gonna be stored on the other callable as inside of one of the member variables, and then it uses that to create the other callable, I think. Or maybe the final callable is the one that returns there. Yeah, so I was looking to the macro, not the function. And this one I think I've seen. Yeah, so all that this is doing is just initializing is storing the information on the object class based on slots. So if you don't have, which is basically a hash. So if you don't have, signal map is the hash that they use to keep track of the signals. So that's how you subscribe, and then it's gonna be key value pair of a string to the callable, I think, which is the class that has this stuff. And this function is probably from the, so this probably gets the class name from the objects somehow. This is the stuff that I was thinking about, that it checks to see if it's a string name or not. So if method is a string name, a method is on the callable. And this is the stuff that initializes there in the beginning. But I think usually it's not going to be a string. It's going to be a pointer to a function. So let me see. So the method is this one, and then it passes through this stuff here, which is going to be some method. And then it's going to pass this one to the other. But it's checking on the callable. So, oh, I think. So store the stuff on the data methods. So this is gonna be the callable custom. I guess when it checks for the methods, is checking automatically on the. But that wouldn't like it wouldn't make sense because it doesn't inherit. It uses this show, so it's storing as a variable. So I guess it's just gonna be the method is just gonna be whatever the default value is. Because it's checking on the condition to see if it's standard is checking on the variable from the callable, and that's the final callable that is gonna. So this doesn't have anything related to the methods. It's the other callable custom that uses the methods to store on the data. So callable custom stores the method on its data, but on this callable it doesn't have any methods because it doesn't initialize here. So I guess this is the main difference between them, the constructors. This is you check to see again if it's a string name, and if it isn't, it's just going to store the method. So if you initialize the callable with another callable, then you're going to pass the method here. And the question is, what usually is the method? It's going to be function pointer. The problem is that yeah, it has to be a function pointer. It's kind of confusing because of the way that it declares here, but it is a function pointer. So when it passes here, it's going to be a function pointer, I think. Yeah, it's going to be. So either way, it's not going to be a string name, I think. So this is the standard, I think, because it's checking to see if it is different. So if it isn't, so if the method isn't a string name, is the standard, and usually it's going to be a function pointer. So function pointer is not going to be the string name. It's very confusing though, because the thing is I'm not really sure because the type here is a string name. So when it assigns there, maybe it's overloading the operator. So even though it's a function pointer, somehow it becomes a string name. Yeah, let's see here. Maybe that's why they did this, because they want to save as a string name. So it's extremely confusing. The question is what is but even if this is happening there, it's not gonna it's not gonna be a string name because the actual callable that is using this didn't initialize the p method. It was a custom callable that initialized the string method. And the custom callable is the one used to initialize the other callable. So on the custom callable, maybe it is a string name because of this function here, because the custom callable is gonna have the data. But I think it's just data, it's not underscore data. So maybe it's not the same thing. Hmm. Yeah, so this custom is gonna be, it's very confusing. 'Cause this is the other one. I think on the example that I'm looking is using this one, not this. So this one, if it does use this one, then it doesn't matter there. You just initialize the callable with the custom. But it doesn't matter that much because this doesn't have anything that interesting. I think the main thing, I don't have to just like understand everything. I really don't like the way that this is just because it's very confusing to understand. So, but maybe they had to do this way because of the way that they do with memory and some other stuff that I don't know. But just from my standpoint, my point of view of trying to learn how the thing works is very confusing. And it feels like there should be a way to simplify this a lot, probably. But the main thing to understand is just that it is gonna hold everything on this signal map, and it's probably gonna it maps the string that you pass there with this callable. So if you don't have, I think, yeah, this is when you don't have the thing on the signal map, the signal. You check to see if it's valid. This probably gets from the object class the name of the, because this, in order to subscribe to events, it needs to be a class that inherits from the object class. So what this is probably doing is getting the name of the class that called the connect function, which is a class that is going to inherit from object. So it's getting that name and it's checking to see if because the class DB is the class that they use to store all the classes. Because as far as I understand now, the servers use this class to do stuff. It's like a messenger pattern, if I remember correctly, where you subscribe everything to the class DB and then other stuff on the GUI, either on the editor or probably on the GDScript, can look into the class DB to see if the class exists or the function or whatever. So basically it stores all the classes. So I think it's checking to see based on the string name if the class has the methods probably. Not really sure though. So if this is true, it's gonna do this stuff here. So if it is invalid, it does this. So this is only, so if the signal is not valid on the class, it still checks to see if it's valid on the script. It's probably GD script, but I'm not really sure. I think this probably doesn't matter. True. It's just some stuff to see if you if it's gonna put the signal, but maybe this is used later. I think probably what it's doing is just checking to see if the method exists, but it's kind of weird. So it's checking to see on the class hierarchy if it exists. It's fucking confusing. It's confusing because I don't know. Apparently, I think that this is how it's supposed to be. So whenever you call, whenever you subscribe a function, it can only be a function that is from the class that created the connect. That's probably how it works. So you can't pass any function you want there. It has to be a function that is either from the class or from the class hierarchy. And this is what this is doing, is checking that. So It's getting the class DB. It's getting the class from the class DB class. Then it checks to see on each of the classes that's either the class itself or the ones that inherits from if they have the signal on the map. But it's kind of confusing. Because shouldn't it be subscribing to the thing now? So maybe I'm confusing things. It might be something related to when it subscribes classes to this class here. That it like the class DB stores not only the class but all the methods that the classes have. So and does that on here. So maybe that's how it works. It's gonna come from the class. So. I'm not sure if it's worth it to spend a bunch of time. Because I'm not really sure. I think just understanding how it works on the like surface level is enough. Sure. Yeah, obviously I can already use it just based on the stuff that I know. So I'm not really sure like how worth it is to spend a bunch of time trying to understand how everything works here instead of doing. I think doing the other stuff is probably more important. So using the things first, then later going back to this, because at some point I think I have to understand how the class DB works. But I wasn't planning to do this now. I think I have to the other stuff to figure out is more important. So I have to follow on the list here. Yeah, but like I said, I don't like this very much. It's very hard to understand. Mainly why they did things like this. That's what I want to know. The problem is that I'm gonna have to look into a bunch of examples. That's the issue. I think probably the best thing to do is just to look into the emit signal and then maybe look into the where it actually gonna process the inputs on the main loop and then puts the breakpoints. I think that's probably better to do. So the main thing to understand is just gonna put on the signal map. If it doesn't have, it's gonna store the data on the signal data. And this probably yeah, it has to have a slot map. And initializes this connection with the information, which is also I guess this part is not that confusing. So the final thing that it uses is this slot. So inside of these slots, the first slot there is actually very confusing, I'm not gonna lie. And the final thing that it uses is just these slots and then the S, and it's gonna store the callable as a key value pair. So I have to look into the emit signal. Because I'm not really sure if the emit signal is going to be the thing that triggers the function though. And this is very similar to the other callable custom thing there. I think it's probably this. It's exactly the same function, but probably with a different name. The one that I was just looking at on the callable custom thing. It's passing the name and the args. And this is the same stuff there from the other one. Just getting from the signal map. This is going to be the data. I guess it's just confusing because of memory stuff. And now that I think about, so maybe I was thinking about it the wrong way because, so I think that the way it works is that you should only emit, like you can only subscribe and emit signals from the same class, but maybe not. Because the thing that I'm thinking about now is how, I guess I'm thinking from the front end, like if you subscribe, but I don't even, no, I think in the front end is the same thing. So usually you subscribe from the DOM elements. Yeah, but then I don't remember really well. I think you can emit like regardless of whether, so you can subscribe to one event in multiple different DOM elements and then emit that event and then all of them are gonna run the function, I think. I don't remember very well. So I'm not really sure if it is like this here. Because this is gonna be from the object class. So it's only looking at the slots from the object class. Because the signal map is gonna be from the class. So I think you can only subscribe and emit events from the same class, I think. Otherwise, there would be some stuff here. Oh no, there's some. I think that the way that it works is you should always, or you can only emit from the same class you subscribe the events from. So I'm gonna stop here because the timer ran out. The next thing that I'm gonna do is just go over the. I think I'm gonna spend some time more because it's very confusing there. So I think I probably have to clarify a little bit more. I get the general thing. So basically use a hash on the object class, and you're just gonna connect a string there with a function that you pass. And then there's the confusing part is the understanding why they use all these classes and what happens with when you have arguments. Yeah, but I guess when you have arguments, you just pass there as a string. It's just gonna be whenever you pass a string to the emit signal, it's just gonna be the arguments. I think it is a string based on the thing here. So you pass as a string, and then it converts to this variant, probably. No, it's passing as a string, true. So the string is probably, yeah, the string is the event. Then if the function has arguments, you pass. Let's call the fourth. Let's see if there's one. And this is also a string. Weird. So it's probably converting the type here. Yeah, because it creates another thing here. Creates a variant here, and then it loops over the args. So it's basically, there's probably some like type conversion because it declared the array as a variant here. So even though it's passing a string there, somehow it becomes a variant. It's the type of the array, and then it passes that. So I guess the string you pass is just the name of the methods, probably. The first string is the name of the events, and the other ones, yeah, I'm not really sure though. So I guess I have to clarify this. But the only thing that makes sense is that it would be the name of the name of the method doesn't make sense because so it has to be the name of the arguments because like the string already should have you should store on the hash map the information that is needed to call the methods subscribe based on the string. So the first one is the event that is emitting, and the second or more arguments are the strings that are the like it's gonna specify somehow what arguments true. Yeah, I'm not really sure actually. So I think I have to spend more time trying to clarify this, because it is very important to understand. It's kind of frustrating because of how confusing it is. I'm going to spend more time on this, and then after I clarify this, I'm going to search based on the labels here to put breakpoints. And probably what I'm going to do before I even do the module is to create manually from the editor. Just like try to create something similar to this stuff here. I'm not gonna do obviously maybe no, I think it's not worth it to try to implement the Barnsut algorithm from the GD script. I think the thing that makes sense is just create two balls, try to create an arrow, and then the GUI elements. I think that's probably the most important. Because once I understand that how to create this from the editor, then it's gonna become a lot easier to see what parts I'm gonna have to. Probably the first thing to do that is easier is just to create a module. Then from the module, like try to simplify as much as possible to try to implement. So the idea is probably from the module, assuming that the editor, I'm gonna be using the editor version, and I'm going to know. Yeah, but the thing is like where exactly? Because the way that I was thinking about it is just in the same way that I was doing the other application, where like as soon as the executable runs, the thing is gonna create all the stuff that I need already. And this is kind of the parts that is kind of difficult to clarify because like from one point of view, I can separate everything into its own project because the only thing that matters to create a game in Godot is just to generate the files. that define the sync files and the GDScript files. And then obviously I'm gonna figure out how to do it with C++ instead of GDScript, but all that I would have to do is just create the files. And then I use the files on the either to run the engine or to run the editor. I think that that would be the best, but the problem is that I probably need like I need the functions from the definitely the functions from the engine and then maybe the functions from the editor as well to create the but maybe there's an easier way if I figure out how to parse the files. I can maybe create the files directly from the code without having to use any class on the engine. If I just figure out the pattern on how to create everything. But I'm not really sure if that's the best way to go about it because what direction I'm gonna go. I think it's probably better to figure out how to interact with the engine. But then I'm not really sure where to draw the line, or whether or not should I think probably the best thing to do would just make it based on an argument on the command line, and then do the same thing that they do for the editor. Just create another command line argument and then pass the name of the project, the path to the project, and from that path I can use the dir access or file access file to read the files from the project, or the project Godot file, or maybe I can get from the project settings though. And then generates this stuff using the engine classes. Yeah, but I'm gonna spend more time trying to figure this stuff out here because it's very confusing. And then I'm gonna continue to follow there the steps. But I'm gonna stop here today. Probably gonna come back soon and continue to do this stuff.